Starting now, sir.
Yes. And you keep.
Good afternoon, all. Wish you all a very happy World Meteorological Day. The theme of the day is Ocean, Earth Climate and Weather. On this auspicious day, this is the second lecture of webinar series being organized every month by Meteorological Training Institute, Pashan, Office of Head CR&S Pune. I would like to request Dr. Sunat Datta sir, Head MTI, to brief about this new initiative of webinar series started at Met Training Institute, Pashan, Pune. Datta sir.
Thank you, Sonali. Actually, Meteorological Training Institute, it is the main center of India Meteorological Department for the capacity development of meteorological personnel of the department, extra department, and overseas participants in the field of weather and allied services. Till now, this training institute, this wings of India Meteorological Department is engaged mainly to strengthen and develop the capacity of the meteorological personnel in the field which I have mentioned. But now it is a societal demand that training wings of India Meteorological Department should take the responsibility of developing the capacity of the community also in the weather services and the allied services also. Weather and climate services and allied services. In view of that, DGM-IND has kind enough, he has entrusted upon this new assignment to this Meteorological Training Institute, and we thought how to achieve this goal. Now, to achieving this goal, we have started this new initiative of organizing webinar series of lectures by eminent scientists, operational meteorologists, which will help the community, general public, media, all those people in the field of weather services, climate services, etc. So with this small introductory talk and giving my heartfelt thanks to our speaker, Dr. Francis, who have very kindly accepted our invitation, I now request Mr. G.K. Sawai Sarje, scientist, to say a few words about Dr. Francis. Thank you. Mr. Sawai Sarje, you are muted. You speak from the beginning.
I am really honored and happy to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Francis, scientist affiliated to Indian National Center for Oceanic Information and Services under Ministry of Earth Sciences, to meteorological fraternity and viewers. He is head of Ocean Modeling and Data Assimilation Division. He is project director, Monsoon Mission Phase 2. He is chairman, Academic Advisory Committee for International Training Center for Operational Oceanography and students coordinator. His research interests are numerical modeling of ocean general circulation, waves and tides, Indian ocean variability, Indian summer monsoon variability, coupled processes over the tropical oceans. His credentials are number of papers in peer-reviewed international national journals are 38, number of chapters books is 7, and he has many awards received, and among them in 2010 he has received MOES Med Certificate, Ministry of Earth Science, Government of India. Thank you, sir.
Now I request Dr. Francis to give his WMO talk, WMO day talk.
Thank you, Dr. Somanath, Dr. Gavishankar, and others. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me for this important event. I will share my slide and from there we'll start. Are you able to see my presentation?
We are able to see. We are able to see.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Somanath.
Okay.
So today I will be speaking on the role of oceans on the interannual variation of Indian summer monsoon rainfall. This is 23rd of March 2021, the World Meteorological Day. And we know that this year WMO has dedicated the World Meteorological Day to the oceans. The theme is for the oceans, our climate and weather. This marks the beginning of 2021 marks the beginning of UN Decade of Oceans. The next 10 years, WMO and Intergovernmental Oceanographic Panel Commission has decided to spearhead the activities on ocean research, which we can use to harness the fruits of ocean sciences for the sustainable development. So I thought it's appropriate when we talk in India, it's appropriate to talk about the role of oceans on Indian monsoon, which is the lifeline of our country. When it comes to India, we talk about two major weather systems. One is the Indian monsoon system, and the other one is the tropical cyclones. These are the two ocean related or something which has strong connections with oceans and affect the life and livelihood of our country. So, ocean plays an important role in the development of these two systems because these two systems get energy and moisture from the tropical ocean atmosphere or tropical oceans. Both the systems are organized clouds towards the landmass. And we know that there is considerable variation of rainfall, what we get in the Indian summer monsoon season. And this affects every walk of life in our country and the neighboring countries. For example, floods, droughts, and devastating cyclones affect our everyday life when it comes to weather. Now, for those who are interested to follow the monsoon, the first thing which we always talk about is the arrival of monsoon at somewhere in the southern tip of India, Kerala, with very deep, thick black clouds spreading over a large area and start giving rain. And this rain set the mood of the nature also, and all animals, birds, plants, everything changes its life pattern in tune with the rainy season. And we also know that a large fraction of our agriculture is still rain-fed. So we have our agricultural calendar tuned to the arrival of monsoon. And of course, it's a fun time for kids too. But it's not always very fun when we talk about monsoon. Monsoon, if it's very intense, it can affect the life in form of floods, landslides, which can wash away the villages or the settlements. It can destroy our infrastructure, uproot trees, Coastal erosion is an important problem which we may come across during the monsoon season at the coastal belt, and loss of livelihood is something which is quite common when it comes to heavy rain, apart from droughts, which can also have serious impacts on our agricultural activity. So I will quickly play a small video which I have taken from YouTube, just to set the tone of the theme. So I hope it is visible to you, and it just marks how we get rain during this monsoon season. And those who are following the monsoon and those who are monsoon lovers must be very familiar with the way we get rain, starting from small drizzles to large showers. It's something which we always wanted to have. So this is a short video. It's just for 2 minutes or less than 2 minutes. And we can say that the rain that we receive during the monsoon season gives the fresh water very much required for the life to thrive in the subcontinent. And that's how the monsoon help us. So the monsoon rain that happens over the hilly areas are going to give the required water, fresh water for the rivers to flow. Mostly in the Western Ghat region and other parts of the country, this is a very important process. Okay, so I hope that sets the tone of the remaining slides. Now, we all know that the word monsoon was derived from the Arabic word monsoon, which means the reversal of wind. And when Met Department declares the onset of monsoon, it's not only the wind, but many other parameters also are considered before finally declaring the monsoon. But for a common man who looks for the monsoon, the monsoon means continuous rain and rain and rain, which is going to be the most important event in the monsoon season. In a monsoon season, even if we have good winds and if we don't have rain, common man is not going to be very happy. On an average, the country receives about 89 centimeter rainfall for the entire 4 months of the monsoon season. The questions which immediately comes into our mind are, where does this much fresh water come from? And why do the amount of rain we receive year after year is not the same? If you try to answer these questions, I think we are close to the theme of WMO Day celebration in 2021. Now, if we are looking for the spatial distribution of rainfall,
गुड अभी तो कोई कुछ नहीं है
yeah, okay. So if we are looking at the spatial distribution of the rainfall over India, it's widespread, and we can see that there is a large spatial variation. We have very good rainfall over the Western Ghat region. We have very good rainfall over the northeastern parts, and also to some extent good rain over the central parts of India and eastern parts of India. But rainfall distribution, if you look at carefully, the northwestern part and southeastern part receives less rain. And if you look at year-to-year variation of rainfall, you can see that there is considerable variation in the rainfall. And there are years in which the rainfall goes, something like about 1 standard deviation from the mean line, which we generally call as excess seasons. And there are years where the rainfall is below normal by 1 standard deviation or more, which we call as droughts. Now, earlier research by Sika and Gadgil in 1980 has brought out a very important aspect of monsoon, that the rainfall that we receive during the monsoon is not coming from isolated cloud system, but rather it's coming from a large-scale organized convective system. They have done this with the help of satellite imageries, which were very rare on those years. But continuous monitoring of these satellite images gave them an impression of how large the cloud systems are during the monsoon season. But if you look at the global picture of cloudiness, we can see that it's not just limited to the Indian region. It has large longitudinal extent. It's almost seen across the globe. And also, it's an important factor that we may come across when we analyze these satellite images is that there is a large latitudinal extent or latitudinal variation in this cloudiness from January to July when we look at these satellite images. So our Indian longitudes, these are having these cloud systems migrate quite a lot from January to July. You can see that more clearly in the picture where the mean location of intertropical convergence zone is located during July and January. You can see that most part of Pacific and the tropical Atlantic, the January and July ITC sets are close by. But when it comes to the Indian region, we have a large latitudinal extent over which this January and July ITC set are separated. And also when it comes to the Indian region, we can say that it's not the moisture laden air that come from the southern hemisphere that converges at the location of the convergence, but it can be from the same latitude itself. So often they are referred as tropical convergence zones instead of intertropical convergence zone when it comes to the monsoon regime. So if you look at the rainfall in the tropical oceans near us, the top panel, you will see that the rainfall that we get during the monsoon, June to September season, there are two peaks you can see. One is near the equator, which we can call as oceanic TC set, and then of course we have a northern part also. And quite often you can see that during the monsoon season, you can see that cloud system, which you can see in the right hand side. What I have plotted is the long wave radiation, outgoing long wave radiation, which is plotted as a function of latitude and time. Outgoing long wave radiation is a very good measure of cloudiness. Lower the values of OLR, higher the amount of cloud we have. So you can see that from the equatorial or oceanic TCZ, where the oceanic TCZ is present, from there to the northern part, there is a migration of ITCZ. Quite often that happens, probably 2 or 3 times in a season. And the latitudinal extent to which the northern part to which this TCZ extends varies. During June, it goes to something like 20 degrees, but when the monsoon is completely set over the country in July and August, this can go up to 25 degrees or even more. And when the monsoon retreats, you can see that same kind of northward propagation happens, but they are limited to a lower latitude. So this is how the oceanic TC set is feeding to the continental TC set, or we can see that how the monsoon is progressing in terms of TC set. But monsoon is maintained not only by TC set, progression of TC set, but also by the low pressure systems and monsoon depressions, which form over the warm oceans like Bay of Bengal and the South China Sea, and then move over to the Indian mainland. So there is very much good connection between the rain what we receive over the land during the monsoon season and the processes that are happening over the oceans. So maybe understanding that those processes will give us a clue on how the large scale variability in the interannual time scale is dependent on the ocean part. Now, for those who are very familiar with the ocean atmosphere process, the most important parameter that interact between the atmosphere and ocean is the sea surface temperature, because it's at the boundary of the air-sea interface. And we have good research, and there are two classical papers which talks about the relationship between the sea surface temperature and the deep convection. Gadgil have shown in 1984 that a temperature of about 27.5 degrees is must for deep convection to form over the tropical oceans. And Graham and Burnett also have said that 27.5 degree is a good threshold, but that's not the only condition that is required to have the convection. Now, if you look at the right-hand panel of the screen, you will see that there is a special pattern of outgoing long wave radiation. It's a climatological pattern for June to September, and then there is a contour that encompasses 27.5 degree isotherm. You can see that the convective regime, which is shaded part in that map, is completely enclosed by the 27.5 degree isotherm. You don't see convection outside that isotherm. But it doesn't mean that everywhere where it is inside that 27.5 degree isotherm, there is cloudiness or convection. So there are regions where convection is not there, irrespective of being warmer oceans. So SST being at 27.5 degree is an essential criteria, but not sufficient. But when you come to the left-hand side, you will see a frequency distribution. And what you are going to see is that up to something like 27.5 degrees Celsius, when the SST increases, we can see that there is a gradual decrease in the OLR, which means cloudiness increases. But beyond that, you don't have much relationship. Even with higher SST, you can have OLR values of the order of 240 or 180, which means that OLR can be anywhere. That again says that the warmer oceans are not necessarily the convecting regions, but for the convection to happen, you need warmer ocean. So this is an important concept when it comes to the ocean. Now, we know that the oceans, warmer SSTs are going to promote convection. Now, if we want to link the ocean with the monsoon, we need to know how the convective patterns over the warm ocean are related to the monsoon. For this, what I have shown here is a correlation map. What I have taken is that here June to September mean rainfall as a time series I have taken over the Indian region and then correlated with OLR everywhere. So when you have a positive correlation, that means when rainfall increases over India, OLR also increases. That means when OLR increases means cloudiness decreases. This is a classical example that when the rainfall over India increases, we get less cloudiness over the Central Pacific region. And this link is quite known as the El Nino link between El Nino and Indian summer monsoon. You can see that the box which shows the link 1 is the region where active convection takes place during the El Nino time. So if you have strong convection over this box, it is going to affect the convection over the Indian region. But another link what you are going to see in this pattern is that, okay, when the rainfall over the Indian region increases, so as it increases over the western part of the equatorial Indian Ocean, but not same happens over the eastern part. We have a opposite link between rainfall over the Indian region and the convection or rainfall over the eastern region. So we have a situation that, okay, rainfall over the western part is good for monsoon and eastern part is not so good for monsoon. So we have a situation of opposite phases which is going to influence the monsoon. And this link is often called as the equatorial Indian Ocean oscillation link with monsoon. And sometimes these events are co-occur with Indian Ocean dipole events. So both Indian Ocean dipole or equatorial Indian Ocean oscillation and the El Nino and Southern oscillation are coupled ocean atmosphere processes. And these systems are of planetary scale and generally they evolve along with the evolution of the monsoon. That means these systems interact each other. Now, to get a little brief on what is El Nino, and we know that El Nino is the situation when the Eastern Pacific and the Central Pacific is warmer than normal. That's what you can see from the more reddish surface over the ocean, and this is associated with slightly deeper thermocline in the eastern part. It's not as deep as the western part, but it's certainly deeper compared to a situation in the La Nina condition where the thermocline is coming all the way up to the surface. Whereas in the El Nino condition, it's slightly in the deeper side. And we have good convection happening over the Central Pacific during El Nino time. And this is how the tropical circulation happens. And during the La Nina time, we have warmer SST over the western part of the Pacific, and cloudiness is intense over the western part. Eastern side is cooler, and the thermocline comes to almost to the surface, so that cooler water comes to the surface. And then we have a easterly wind regime over the tropical ocean. And we can easily see this from the OLR SST map, which is shown in the bottom. And during El Nino time, you can see that 27.5 degree isotherm over the tropic is quite fat. There is a considerable amount of area encompassed by this 27.5 degree isotherm in the Central Pacific. And this is also associated with increased convection over the Central Pacific compared to the western part. Whereas during the La Nina case, we can see that the isothermal line, or 27.5 degree isotherm, is quite narrow here, and the cloudiness is intermittent. That means not much clouds over the Central Pacific, but there is considerable amount of convection over the western part of the Pacific. This is something which we are very familiar in terms of El Nino and Southern Oscillation. But when it comes to the equatorial Indian Ocean oscillation, we have a kind of situation where the convection over the western part of the Indian Ocean is unfavorable for the convection over the eastern part, and the convection over the eastern part is unfavorable for that over the western part. If you look at the right-hand side of the slide, you will see two cases, 1994 August and 1986 August. These are two opposite phases of Equino. The positive phase is in 1994, where we have excessive convection over the western part. This is OLR anomaly. That means negative OLR anomaly means more cloudiness. And you can see that the surface winds are blowing from east to west, whereas the eastern part of the equatorial Indian Ocean is less cloudy. And this is associated with good convection over the Indian region. The same way, if you go to the 1986 pattern, you have less convection over the western side, good convection over the eastern side, surface winds are westerlies, and the link between Indian region and the Western Indian Ocean are very clean. And this is important because when you have an opposite phase in the convection over the tropical equatorial Indian Ocean, we can see the reflection of that convection in the equatorial winds also. And we generally consider that wind anomaly over the equatorial Indian Ocean, central equatorial Indian Ocean, as a good indicator of Equino. Now, there is a lot of ocean dynamics behind the development of Equino and then its subsequent development into Indian Ocean dipole. When we have good convection over the western part, it's going to have easterlies, as I shown in the previous slide, and these easterlies can trigger upwelling Kelvin wave, which are going to cool the eastern part of the equatorial Indian Ocean along with the coastal upwelling. So we have a situation, the cooler SSTs over the eastern side. At the same time, the easterlies can also trigger downwelling Rossby waves, which can go to the west and warm the Western equatorial Indian Ocean. So we will eventually get a situation where the Western Indian Ocean is warmer than the Eastern Indian Ocean, and then we call them as the positive Indian Ocean dipole if it evolves into that level. Otherwise, the convective anomalies can sustain as such without much interaction with the response from the ocean. It all depends on the preconditioning of ocean, whether ocean is ready to change. That's how the IOD Equino develops further into IOD. Now we have two conditions we have seen. One is the El Nino and the other one is the Equino. We have seen that these two processes or these two phenomena have links to Indian summer monsoon. And if you look at the individual contribution of these cases, like, okay, if you take an index of ENSO, which is nothing but I have taken the 3.4 SST anomaly and then multiplied by -1 to make sure that warmer events are bad for monsoon. So negative values are bad. So we can see that when the ENSO index is negative, you have large number of droughts, or most of the droughts are happening when the ENSO index is negative. But there are a couple of cases when ENSO index is positive, also we had droughts. Same way, when the ENSO index is positive, we had mostly excess seasons, but there were a couple of excess seasons when the ENSO index was negative. So ENSO is not going to completely explain what happens with the interannual variability of monsoon in terms of their extremes. Same way, if you look at Equino, Equine is also not going to explain everything. We have cases where the positive equine is associated with droughts and negative equine associated with excess seasons. So these two are not going to solve individually, but if we put them into a phase plane, the ISMR into the phase plane of equine and ENSO, what you are going to see is a clean separation of red dots from the blue dots. And that means when you have both Equino and ENSO index unfavorable, or either of them unfavorable, we can get droughts. And when we have both favorable or either of them favorable, we can get excess seasons. This is very important, and we have looked at the statistical significance of this, and it's found to be very, very high. So if you have such two indices, and we can see from this slide that both equine and ENSO are very poorly correlated. You can see that that's very highly spread. That means correlation values are very low. So this can be considered as two independent modes as far as Equino and ENSO is concerned. And Equino alone can explain about 19% of variability, and ENSO can explain about 29% of variability of Indian summer monsoon based on the correlation values you see here. But if you put them as a linear combination, the ENSO index and equine are put together as a linear combination and constructed a composite index, then we can see that all droughts, all red dots you see here, are associated with a negative value of composite index, and all excess seasons are associated with the positive values of composite index. And see that both these indexes put together in a linear combination, it can explain 53% of ISMR variability, which is very, very substantial. Now, with this background knowledge, we were watching the monsoons as they evolve. And in a recent case in June 2019, we have noticed that the rainfall anomaly in June over the entire India was 32% below normal. In the last few years, when such big anomalies happened in June, they all turned out to be droughts for the season. So these were very important, and people started giving more attention to the how the system is going to evolve in the coming months in 2019. Another worrying effect was that when we look at the sea surface temperature evolution, SST evolution, which you will see in the as a time series in the right hand side of the slide, you will see a blue curve and a red curve. Red curve is for the SST of the Eastern Indian Ocean. Blue curve is the SST of the Western Indian Ocean. You will see dashed lines on the top of that, which are the long-term means or the climatologies. What you can see is that in June 2019, from beginning of June 2019 or late May 2019, the sea surface temperature of the Western Indian Ocean started decreasing rapidly. It has come to one point of time, it has come closer to the climatology or even came below that. At the same time, the SST of the Eastern Indian Ocean was remaining warm, more or less close to the climatological values. And this is worrying because this gives an indication of a negative Equino or a negative IOD in the tropical Indian Ocean. Another worrying effect was that if you look at the convection over the tropical Pacific, you can see that the convection over the central Pacific was still going on in June and July of 2019, which was giving an indication that an El Nino situation is still continuing. So we have a deadly combination of negative equino with an El Nino, which can take our monsoon fate very bad. And we have such experience in 2002 and other years. So things were turning out to be very bad in 2019 when but we kept on watching the events. And what was very interesting in 2019 is that in the left-hand side panel, you will see two time series. Out of that, the right-hand side time series is the depth of 20-degree isotherm at 80.5 degrees just south of Sri Lanka. And this was observed by a moored buoy there. And you can see that the depth of 20-degree isotherm is more like the depth of thermocline in the ocean, where the max up to which we have the warmer waters. And the thermocline was quite shallow in the beginning of May. But as the season progressed, we can see that the thermocline started increasing, deepening. And we can see that it has gone up to something like 140, 150 meters by early June. This was associated with a kind of sea level anomalies, which you see in the sequence panel, sequence figure in the below panels. You will see the sea level anomaly on 25th April, then 5th May, 15th May, 25th May, 5th June, and 15th June. What you see is that on 25th April, you can see that there is a positive anomaly of sea level anomaly in the central and eastern Indian Ocean, tropical Indian Ocean, which has further gone to the east, hugging to the coast of Sumatra, and then started moving out, both in the southern and northern hemisphere. And then it started further moving away from the coast as two independent blobs. And by 5th June, you can see that they have come all the way to down tip of Sri Lanka and then south of it. This is where you saw that deeper thermocline in the buoy observation. And from our experience, we know that the situation is something like a westward propagating downwelling Rossby wave, which has in fact come from the eastern boundary of the equatorial Indian Ocean. And we know that once this Rossby wave is formed, it is going to move further westward, deepen the thermocline in the western side further, and this can arrest the cooling in the Western Indian Ocean. So this was a speculation, but there was a reason behind that, because in 2007, a similar case happened, and you can see how the sea level anomaly propagated to the west. This is the observed sea level anomaly, and the red patch with a black line over the top of that is actually a westward propagating Rossby wave. And we could see that in 2007, when this Rossby wave reached the Western Indian Ocean, it has actually arrested the cooling of Western Indian Ocean, and that gave a clear background for the positive equino to form further. And that became a full-fledged positive equino in 2007. And then the monsoon became very, very good in 2007. So we were anticipating a similar situation in 2019, even though situation in by end of July was not very good looking. But only hope we had was that this Rossby wave is going to do the same thing what we had seen in 2007. And when we put our educated guess and then later came back and validated that, we were proved to be right. You can see that this is where we stopped our observations when we came and said that, look, there is a Rossby wave coming and it is likely to deepen the thermocline in the West Indian Ocean and arrest the cooling there. So it can trigger a positive equino. And when we came back later and looked at the SST in the West Indian Ocean, you can see that SST started increasing substantially. It has gone all the way up to 28 degrees Celsius by early August. And with that, the East Indian Ocean started cooling, a perfect combination for a positive equino, positive IOD to develop, and a good rainfall to follow. And this is what happened in the bottom panels. You will see the Euler anomaly patterns of August and September, you will see a positive equino with enhanced convection over the West Indian Ocean, less convection over the East Indian Ocean, good rain over the Indian region, and same thing continued with much more intensity in September. Added to that, the signal of El Nino in the Central Pacific vanished by the time. So ultimately, 2019 turned out to be a good monsoon despite having a below normal rainfall of massive below normal rainfall in June. These observations we have and understanding we have should be translated into the models for a forecast, and how much we have succeeded in that. So what I have again shown here a correlation map of rainfall over the Indian region, or ISMR to we can say, to a rainfall everywhere. This time I have taken rainfall instead of OLR. So opposite correlation is really opposite. That means when the rainfall over Indian region increases, rainfall over the Central Pacific decreases. This is very clean from the observation, and also we can see an opposite phase in the equatorial Indian Ocean. Rainfall over the Indian region is oppositely correlated to that in the eastern region of the tropical Indian Ocean, and to the positively correlated to the western Indian Ocean, convection over the or rainfall over the western Indian Ocean. Now this combination are we getting in the models? What I have shown in the bottom panel is the same thing I reproduced from CFS2 model. And you can see that, of course, the Pacific system has been captured. You have opposite relationship between rainfall over India and the Central Pacific. And this was very well captured. And we can see that it's a bit more intense than what we expected. But if you look at the map over the Indian region, this is exactly opposite what we saw in the observation. We don't get the same correlation to the West Indian Ocean or opposite correlation to the East Indian Ocean. This is a problem. And this is not a problem only for the CFS2. It's a problem for many of the ocean atmosphere coupled models. Now, when we look at more carefully with the model, we will see that certain years like 1983, 1997, these years, the rainfall captured or the reproduced by the model are not as good as we should have, or what we found in observation. For example, 1997, the observation shows no anomaly in all India rainfall. That means the ISMR anomaly was close to zero. But CFS model predicted something like -2 standard deviation rainfall. Same as in 1983, where we expected, or we experienced an above normal excess season in 83, but what we predicted by CFS was negative anomaly. So these are concerns, and these are, we know that 83 and 97 are associated with equino events. So the models have difficulty in getting the link between equino and monsoon right, and this continues now also, and that's why we are not able to get the equino based monsoon extremes right in the models. At the same time, when we have strong El Nino, we get its influence on the model, and we get things right there. So I will just quickly go over this slide, because this is something which is showing how good the model is reproducing the Indian Ocean variability in terms of empirical orthogonal function patterns. And we can see that the first pattern is captured very well by the model, observation in the left side and model in the right hand side. The basin scale warming or cooling has been captured very well by the model. But the second mode, which is considered to be the Indian Ocean dipole, is not well captured. What we find for the model is a region where in the western Indian Ocean having a very high variability, and this is extending to the eastern side along with the flow of monsoon, which I have shown in the bottom. So monsoon winds are carrying these anomalies. So this is not surprising that when in a normal condition, when we have strong winds along the Somali coast, it's going to create upwelling situation, and this upwelled cool water are going to be transported to the eastern side through the monsoon currents, and that's what we see in this one. So the ocean dynamics does not seems to have played a role in getting this anomaly in the Indian Ocean, at least for the second mode of the variability. But first mode comes right. So IOD is not well simulated by the model, and further we have shown that this is just because the Indian Ocean circulation in the model is completely driven by the Pacific circulation. So if you have an El Nino, it's going to dictate the monsoon flow, and irrespective of whether you have an internal mechanism or the Indian Ocean dynamics in the observation or the actual situation, the model is not going to reproduce any of those things. Model will just behave to what happens over the Pacific. And we also know that the link between the Indian monsoon and the Pacific system, that El Nino, is very strong. So we will have a situation that El Nino dictating the Indian Ocean circulation, Indian Ocean SST pattern, as well as the Indian monsoon rainfall, and which are going to be completely opposite in phase, and hence we will not get the link between ENSO and Equino. Equino or Equine derived in the model, but there are two curves. One is the full correlation and another one is a partial correlation by removing the effect of El Nino, because we know that El Nino is influencing the Indian Ocean circulation quite a bit. Suppose we remove it statistically, what will happen? So if we are not removing it, what we see in the extreme right is the observation. It should be a positive correlation of about 0.4, but what we are going to get in the most of these cases is negative correlation, and that we expected from the previous slides. But once we reduce the effect of impact of El Nino, we started getting positive correlation. That's the red sticks which is sticking upward. So we are having a situation, we are having models which can do well provided the impact of ENSO are somehow brought down, or we have to scale down the impact of ENSO in these couple models to get the Indian Ocean variability to take a role and dictate the Indian monsoon in the couple models. So to summarize, I have put a few bullet points. We know that the internal variation of Indian summer monsoon has close links to the ocean atmosphere processes in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And it's important that we observe these features so that we can get a good clue on how it's going to evolve, like what we happened to have in 2019. At the same time, couple models have to be improved. They are good in simulating the ENSO link with monsoon, but they have to be proved or tuned better to get the Equino link also right. Probably this can be done by focused effort by looking at the physical relationship between these two. And the couple models, what we found so far is that Equino or IOD comes as a response of ENSO, induced circulation over the equatorial Indian Ocean. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Francis sir, for your interesting and informative lecture. Now I would like to request Dr. Khedikar sir, Scientist C, to give vote of thanks.
Am I audible? Hello. At the outset, I wish to express my sincere thanks to Honorable DGM IMD for kindly entrusting upon this assignment to MTI Pune for building community capacity in the field of weather and allied services. It is my privilege to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of Meteorological Training Institute. I may like to express our sincere thanks to Honorable Speaker. I may like to express thanks to Dr. P.A. Francis, scientist staff, for taking out time from his busy schedule and accepting our invitation to deliver such an informative lecture on the occasion of World Meteorological Day 2021. I am thankful to Head Climate Services Climate Research and Services, IMD Pune, for his valuable guidance. Special thanks to Head Meteorological Training Institute, Pune, for his guidance and support. Thanks to technical team for making this event possible, and valuable support from Dr. Sudeep is acknowledged with the thanks. Last but not least, thanks to all viewers for paying your attention and helping us directly and indirectly to make this event successful. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Soma. Thank you, Dr. Arshad.
Really, it was a nice event. Thank you again. We will have the opportunity to have lectures from you and your colleagues from INCOIS. Thank you. Now we can leave the meeting. Thank you.